Hello, ladies and germs. It's Wednesday Serial. Let's talk other Marvel books. So, first up for me is Captain America 7 and 8. Um, this was an interesting experience for me because I got issue 8 and then I had to go pick up issue 7. So, I read 8 before 7 and then read them again, or read at least the second issue again, the first one in context. And this is taking some mysticism, like otherly entertaining carnival or that kind of older traveling show idea, vaudeville, and bringing it forward with this idea of mysticism. And it's through Straczynski. I think if you were a Neil Gaiman fan, these two issues are worth picking up alone for that because it's a lot of that area that Neil Gaiman usually likes to play with. And it's done in very different ways. Its focus is different than where Gaiman would ever put it. It was interesting because, in a lot of ways, this reminds me of some Doctor Who stuff. I don't know. And the idea is they needed a hero to champion them in this other realm. And Steve, asked them, like, why pull me? You could have pulled any number of other heroes. And she said, it's because of who you're going to be. And you always represent like hope and the people, which is interesting as something with the American thing. I don't know. It was an interesting couple of issues playing with a lot in a small amount of time. And I I don't know. I think it's really cool. I've really been digging this Straczynski run. I've heard some condemnation of it, and I think it's rubbing some people and forcing them to think about some things that they're not necessarily fully comfortable with, but in a way that isn't pointed at them directly or anything. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good place for a superhero comic to be. Not saying they all should, but it's not a bad place for this one, I don't believe. It's 8 issues in, and it's done more for a run and got me to think more about Captain America as a character, superheroes as a whole, heroism, where these characters are, and it's had him doing more honest to goodness heroic things, and is honestly playing on something where Captain America doesn't have a big cast like Spider-Man to draw on, and almost using that as a strength to tell the stories. It's something else. We're on track for this being as monumental a run as Straczynski was on Amazing Spider-Man. And I know a lot of people who believe that was the last great Spider-Man run and only halfway through that run. So, um Fantastic Four 19 plays with an otherworldly thing. The Trapster gets a hold of the cosmic cube and rewrites everything into a noir. But I want to show you like these couple of pages because this is doing something like Sin City, but the art is pulling off some stuff that I think Sin City was going for and just didn't quite hit or something. It's very, very uh well done in that respect. And whereas the story's interesting, and it's interesting as I just read Unstable Molecules, which is in a recent video, it's taking these characters and viewing them in a different lens. And I found that interesting. I found the timing with this issue very interesting for that. But I just want to say, Jesus Abertoff, the colorist on this issue, is, I think, the star this time. Uh, that just the use of color was done in such a way, and like, let's be clear, like this is supposed to look black and white, but it's very much grayscale and very much colored, even when there isn't much color there. And it's just making things pop, and it's making me think more and more that more comics should be more aware of their black and whites and gray tones. Maybe use some colors a little less sparingly as a medium. And I do think it needs to be colored, but there's a lot of comics that just kind of don't look like much of anything because there's just so much to do. Whereas you look at like a manga page or something, and it's hard to decipher something because there's not enough distinction. There's a lot of lines, but there's not a lot of depth with it that might come in with inking or coloring. And I think with digital coloring seen like this, um, it just it makes something memorable. So I know. Excellent issue as always. I still think Fantastic Four currently is the best book Marvel's putting out. Totally incredible. Check it out. Get Fury is up. A lot of old school Punisher fans are very happy about this because it's Frank. But this is going back to the war. And it's a operation to go get Fury, who's in it. And this is very much just kind of a war comic with some of the overtones of this side of Marvel, I guess, but barely any. Um, Curious to see where it goes, but I don't know. It is what it is. And then we shift to the other side of Marvel, which I think is interesting because it is a shift. Ultimate Black Panther is bringing some characters together to kind of talk about state responsibility, government, places in the world. It's trying to do a lot, but what I found really interesting about this as a comic is that it is so self-serious. Uh, there's no comedic relief here, which is something that I mean, especially being a big Priest fan, I've seen kind of either needed in the comic in one way, or when I've seen other writers do Black Panther, they may not have like a comic relief character, but they may have more out there plots or something very comic booky in here. And don't get me wrong, this is very comic booky. They go and they meet Storm, there's superpowers, there's unnecessary fights. But this book is walking a tightrope, and if it missteps, it's a house of cards that's going to fall on itself because all the fans are going to betray it because it's not going to be in line with where they want this to be. But as long as they're staying above that, I think this book is going to get a lot of praise for sure representation, but also talking about a number of heavy subjects in a very tactile way. This could be incredible, or it could all fall apart next issue in a way that you don't normally see. It's interesting. And then there's Ultimate X-Men, which Peach Momoko has been a creator coming up through Marvel for a while doing things. But what really clicked with me reading this issue is you get stuff like this. There's nothing wrong per se, but these are like manga layout pages. There's a lot of pullback and a lot of space left for bubbles or whatnot. And there's effectively a lot of empty space, or a lot of space zoomed in more where stuff need to be. There's typically about four-ish, two to four panels a page. And there's not a lot going on per page, so it's just not moving. But this is also supposed to be a kind of horror book, so the pacing is important, but we're only getting so much an issue. It doesn't feel like a ton happens here because ultimately it doesn't. About 2/3 less than your average comic. So, or at least 1/3 less than your average comic in an issue, but over 3 issues. um I don't know. I'll be curious to see where this book goes when it gets there. But it did kind of make me question some of the differences between American and Japanese publishing and how that isn't being intersected very well here. Uh, Next is Ultimate Spider-Man, which probably the best Spider-Man book of the month. I like Spectacular Spider-Man a lot too, but what's interesting about this issue, and I guess I should say this, like weird, heady political content with a play on characters and race that you couldn't see in normal Marvel, probably, but probably the closest regular Marvel. Slow burn horror story. This is talking heads. This is people meeting for dinner and talking, and not much necessarily moves, but it's very compelling. And we see a whole lot of setup, and there's some talk to the side about the paper that Ben and JJ are setting up. But it's all just kind of moving. There's no Spider Manning, there's no real action. It's people talking at tables, basically. And it's a very compelling issue. And what's interesting too is artistically, there's enough done here to visually keep it compelling, which is something I've been listening to. It's something that people point to Preacher doing particularly well. This is more interesting from that angle than even Preacher was. I mean, because Preacher broke that a lot very violently, as was one for that comic to do, and that was fine. I'm not disregarding Preacher in any way. I'm saying this is an issue of people talking, and it's compelling and it's interesting and it works. And if it wasn't a comic, it wouldn't be the same. Uh, that's interesting, and I think we need a bit more of that because this is setting up stuff so that when action does happen, it's going to mean the world. It's not going to be just another Spider-Man comic. That's major. That's huge. That's revolutionary, and that's kind of pathetic for Marvel. The fact that it is all those things because it's just how you tell stories normally. Uh, a lot of the best action movies actually have long periods without action because they're building it meaning anything. That's all that's happening here. So I don't know, it's interesting, but what I'm starting to see more and more, I guess, is this ultimate line is kind of letting creators take the properties of Marvel or whatnot and just try to make really damn good comics by whatever means the creators seem to think would be best, which I don't know if you know the history of comics, is the only way good comics seem to get made. Uh, I, if you want to argue that, I'll fight you to the death. That's a hill I'll die on. Um, but seeing a lot of the other stuff going through, I'm wondering if this might spark something that carries through because the truth is the secret behind these books and why they're strong and maybe have interesting failure points is the same secret sauce that put Spider-Man on the map, that made the Black Panther interesting and allowed Priest to revitalize it with his run, or uh, the best moments of the X-Men, especially with Claremont in particular, is when he was able to write things and declare. Was there some editorial mandates at times? Sure, but for the most part, they were writing and telling stories and working with the writer and artist to make something every month that was worth picking up. And when you focus on that and not these big events and not what's the big fight at issue 50, I guess, but build to issue 50 for there to be a big fight because you're going to care about it. That's the way it works better. And I think it's just a little bit of return to form that they need because Marvel's gotten too corporate and no and I'm not saying a lot like Spider-Man and whatnot is fine art or anything. But I am saying it's storytelling, it's art, it's something of the human spirit coming forward. And that doesn't come from a corporate environment. It comes from people wanting to make something fucking cool. That's all. That's the difference. That's the whole trick right there. Is an ethos, not any big overthought anything. That's the ethos, that's the difference. And that's interesting because it creates space for Jonathan Hickman to overthink and put something forward. And I'd even say this, we're 4 issues in, and I can kind of see some of the strings for issue 5 coming forward out of this. Already a more interesting story and more compelling to tell than Hoxpox completely. Hoxpox was a mess, and it was meant to be. And there's a lot of interesting stuff in there, but Hickman was doing something that was the most interesting thing for X-Men at the time, which is something they had just basically done 5 times in a row. Okay. This with Spider-Man isn't just Spider-Man as an adult, it's a play on responsibility. It's understanding these roles, and by taking a soap opera group of characters and putting them into more adult situations where they have responsibilities and ties that go beyond uh, the politics of a high school or a coffee shop, but have implications for people under them or around them, actually plays on the themes and drama way, way better. And he did it. I mean, I'm going to say, I mean, by the time we hit issue 6, in one arc, he will have done something that, in a lot of ways, I think fans have really wanted out of Spider Man. And yes, the marriage is there. I think that's. I'm not saying it's unimportant, but it's relatively superficial compared to the textual things he's doing with the story and themes throughout, and the weight of that, and how that marriage is going to be very heavily strained in the next few issues, and what's going to come of that. I don't know. I'm interested to see what's next, and it feels like I'm reading something worth reading again. I'm not picking up Amazing Spider-Man here. It doesn't feel like I'm picking up Amazing Spider-Man because of the title and because the I don't want to break my run. Just want to see what issue 5 is going to be like. I just want to see what issue 6 is going to look like. And I have ideas and I have some theories, and there's some stuff I'm pretty damn well sure of. And I should be. Hickman, if you're writing a good enough story, yeah, you shouldn't necessarily give everything away, but if people are going to build expectations, and they should, because that's part of storytelling. So I'm rambling a lot here, but I think this is at the heart of where a lot of my indecision or grumpiness around a lot of comics have been. And this ultimate line has been a kick in the pants. And frankly, all of these books are really fun and great. And I'm reading them because I want to read them, not because of anything else. So, yeah, that's all. Cheers.